I want to start with, I'll read out the op-ed about Islamophobia, just because we did discuss that in Urdu, but I feel like this was a really good kind of take on it. So the United Nations is a mouthpiece for Islamic propaganda. The UN is tacitly allowing murder of Christians and critics of Islam while passing resolutions against imagined Islamophobia. I'm digging the title already. The story told by Bloomberg is chilling. Priyantha Kumara, who we also talked about at length in a video, was the manager of a sportswear factory in Pakistan. His employees were devoted young Muslims. Priyantha, on the other hand, was an outsider, a Christian from Sri Lanka and one of the few foreigners in the city of Sialkot, the world's largest football manufacturer. Word spread that Priyantha had removed a poster with Islamic verses. Malik Adnan, another manager, tried to hold back an angry crowd by reminding them that their boss couldn't read Urdu. Dozens of employees chased Priyantha onto the factory roof. Within minutes, they had stoned him to death. "Off with his head," shouted the crowd as they set Priyantha's corpse on fire. All recorded in viral videos on social media. He was not the first Pakistani Christian set on fire. A Christian couple was burned alive in a furnace. Priyantha is obviously Sri Lankan, but he was working as an expat in Pakistan. So a Christian couple were burned alive in a furnace. I think we've also discussed that incident before. But a few hours later, news came from Minya, Egypt, that 3 Coptic Christians were massacred by a group of Muslims. They killed them and danced on the remains of their corpses. Upon returning to their village of origin, they were greeted by songs and celebrations shouting Allahu Akbar. A year and a half ago, in front of the Palace of Nations in Geneva, the seat of the UN Human Rights Council, Pakistani Christians held a composed and silent demonstration against the persecution. But for the globalist agenda, the same one that accuses Western states of systematic racism, the persecution of Christians and those perceived as anti-Islam is a great omission. The reason is quickly explained. At the same time as 3 Christians were being torn apart in Egypt, the United Nations voted for the establishment of the International Day Against Islamophobia. And then look, he's quoted here Imran Khan's tweet, which I think you've obviously shared and talked about, I'm guessing, in your Urdu stream already. But this was Imran Khan's tweet. "I want to congratulate the Muslim Ummah today because our voice against the rising tide of Islamophobia has been heard, and the UN has adopted a historic resolution introduced by Pakistan on behalf of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. Designates March 15th, which is an official day because we were talking about days earlier, now as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia." So they have a day. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan announced it. Countries like Azerbaijan, whose soldiers have beheaded elderly Armenian civilians, support the resolution. Iran, where homosexuals are hanged and women without headscarves tortured. Turkey, which has jails full of journalists and writers. Indonesia, where in one region, Aceh, sinful citizens are whipped in the streets. And Nigeria, where every year thousands of Christians are massacred with impunity because primarily and simply they are Christians. The Organization for the Islamic Cooperation is the largest bloc of UN voting countries. Its goal? Criminalize the criticism of Islam. The organization said so expressly. "We need a law that criminalizes Islamophobia." Therefore, the Canadian intellectual Matthew Bocote is right, and he said on French TV, "The UN institutes a Day Against Islamophobia, an initiative led by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, where Christians are sentenced to death. They want to criminalize criticism of Islam. The UN, Europe, and democracies are committed to protecting Islam with an ad hoc day." In France, to name just one European country, there are 35 personalities under police escort for criticizing Islam. The French rep to the UN said that within the EU, France has proposed making the text more universal by refocusing on freedom of religion and the fight against discrimination that affects individuals. But in the end, France also chose not to oppose the resolution. The declaration of the EU is a masterpiece of weakness and duplicity. We are against the spirit of the resolution on Islam, but we vote for it anyway. Anyway, just to sum up, the UN points the way, and countries that embrace the globalist agenda are adapting. At this time in Canada, we have the 86th Bill to Combat Islamophobia. That's what I was referring to earlier. If approved, we would find ourselves in a surveillance climate worthy of the 1984 Big Brother, writes Frédéric Bastien in the Journal de Montréal. nobody would dare say anything in the face of the excesses of radical Islam. And if that wasn't enough, Iran, yes, Iran, will join the United Nations Commission on Women's Rights next week. Soon, the West will not even see the difference between itself and Islam.
Well, the few things that I want to say on that. First of all, yes, Imran Khan is using that as a political tool, and he gave in his recent political rally, he challenged Maulana Fazlur Rahman that, how successful were you in convincing the world about in making the West realize the rise of anti-Muslim. He didn't use the word. He used his word Islamophobia, and obviously there's this huge misunderstanding. And I don't think it's a misunderstanding. I think they're using that on purpose.
Deliberate, yeah.
It's deliberate. That how Imran Khan is selling it, that this is the first step in banning criticism of Islam, which is never going to happen. Mark my words, it would never ever happen. And those who alarmists who are saying that they agree that this is going to lead to criminal prosecution of those who criticize Islam. Never going to happen. Because if we say that, if we speak about atrocities against the homophobia in Islam, we are going with this day, which is recognized by, it's an international day against homophobia. That would, if we criticize Islam on homophobia, then that would be going against that. This is the Australian Human Rights Commission. It's just like that. We have other days like that as well. UN General Assembly approves a resolution condemning Holocaust denial, i.e. also anti-Semitism. There are other days like that. There is this one, acts of violence based on religion and belief. The General Assembly decided to designate 22nd of August as the International Day commemorating the victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief. The day comes right after the International Day of Remembrance and Tributes to the victims of terrorism, 21st of August. So this is a violence based on religion, and that we're going to turn that into an International Day of Apostasy, for example. And that's going to happen as well. It's just, it all revolves around that we need to talk about this. But nobody talks about this, and the Muslim media is deliberately not talking about it. I shared the article of TRT where I need to find that. But anyway, US News actually wrote a good piece on that. And they actually said that elimination of all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion or belief. And what that does say, the full statement of the UN actually says that. It even mentioned, they just put a full stop there. It said, it expresses deep concern at the overall rise in the instances of discrimination, intolerance, and violence, regardless of the actors directed against members of many religion and other communities in various parts of the world. That includes Iran and all the Muslim countries where there is a anti-kafir bigotry, including cases motivated by Islamophobia, and they put a full stop there. TRT put a full stop there, but they didn't read the rest of it. Anti-Semitism as well. Christianophobia as well, and prejudice against persons of other religions or beliefs. So we are probably just a little bit lacking in that way. We need to have an international kafirophobia as well. And I have a firm belief that eventually that would become a day as well. For example, 23rd of March is a World Atheist Day, but it hasn't been sanctioned by the UN.
UN sanctioned, yeah.
Yeah.
But it still exists.
But it would happen. It would happen. So those Muslims who are celebrating that, they are ill-informed, and those alarmists who are thinking that would result in banning the criticism of Islam, I'm telling you, mark my words, it's not going to happen. Islamophobia Day, which is an anti-Muslim bigotry day, which I support in a way that, okay, fair enough, they won the war of idea, and it's a good point. There should not be any anti-Muslim bigotry. We've always said that. People like us say that as well. And even if it gets sanctioned by
us stand by that, not just say it.
Yeah, and if the UN sanctions it, we've got no problem with that. But we're going to have to up the ante, and we're going to have to push our case forward as well by saying that, okay, what about a kafirophobia day as well? And mark my words, there would be a kafirophobia day as well. Or I think the word would be used as apostasy, maybe, because that would include everyone. Kafirophobia, again, there was, kafir is a Muslim term, so you just, again, this is another instance. So you have to be politically correct when you talk about those days. So we have a homophobia day, we have anti-Holocaust denial day. So we have those ones as well. So we're going to have it. So yes, this day was brought forward and the resolution passed by, or a point made by Pakistan in the UN, and Imran Khan is using that as a great victory for him. But they are deliberately misrepresenting the UN's point on that. So yeah, I'm not worried about that. I'm not concerned about that. I think that's a good thing. But it's not. It is never. I would be alarmed and I would be concerned when they say, okay, from now on, you're not allowed to criticize Islam based on homophobia or based on apostasy, based on women's bodily autonomy. You can't criticize Islam. That's when I would be alarmed or concerned. But that has not happened, and in my opinion, that is never going to happen.
Yeah,
so it's
hopefully
not
it will not go backwards in that way at all.
It's not going to happen. But Muslims are just celebrating it because, and I know that I've been watching Pakistani media and they've been like celebrating Imran
Well,
Khan.
this is what I wanted to say. I really understand why I think Imran Khan is so chuffed at this, is because for the longest time now, where Muslims like to play the victim, especially in countries where, when they're in the West and they do form a minority, they have been for the longest time trying to get equated anti-Muslim like discriminatory acts on the same level as something like anti-Semitism, which is like comes from a whole real like lived experience, and they have forever trying to be on that same pedestal, and they finally got the word Islamophobia and anti-Semitism said in the exact same sentence. So I understand why they're really chuffed. But what I don't understand is if it is meant to encapsulate Christianophobia and anti-Semitism and any discrimination of any kind, why is the day that they're all referring to called the UN's official day against Islamophobia? Just that by itself? Or are we misinformed on that? Because it seems weird to me that this whole thing is to mark a whole level of discriminatory acts, yet you give the name of the day after just one specific group.
With that's what happens. I mean, if you make a homophobia day and you recognize that there's a homophobia in the world, but you can always say, what about?
And I guess they have Holocaust denial and stuff, and they said we don't have one for anti-Muslim bigotry, so let's just give this day to Islamophobia.
Yes, exactly. Again, we just disagree with the term purely from linguistic sense that Islamophobia means banning of criticism of Islam, but it's quite clear that that's not how the UN is seeing it, or that's not how the Western world is seeing it. Anti-Muslim bigotry, that's how they're seeing it. So linguistically,
which is good, because that is in line with their individual constitutions and their laws at home and the UN's laws itself. So they by default have to stay within that territory.
Exactly, and so anyway, so this person is saying that we're not going to happen. What is Harris talking about? And no, I think that's my very well-informed, intelligent opinion. So I think time will tell. Truth labeled as misinformation and disinformation. I don't know what you're talking about. What truth? That there are hijabi girls who've been pushed down the stairs. There are girls who've been discriminated just because they're Muslims. So that is misinformation, disinformation. I don't know what you're talking about. So this thing, anti-Muslim bigotry, is real. It is real, and for all intents and purposes, it is going to rise unless we do something about it. Yes, we can always throw a what about. What about Kafirs? What about Ahmadi discrimination in Pakistan? It's a state-sanctioned discrimination. Now, even when a guy and girl get married in Islam, they have to say, I believe in the finality of Muhammad, which is a jibe at Ahmadi Muslims because they have a little bit of a different twisted view.
In Pakistan, that is, yeah.
Yeah, in Pakistan, that is. So that's a state-sanctioned discrimination. So all of those things happen, and all of these movements are taking place, and eventually the UN would end up recognizing all of them. So I'm not concerned by that. I'm not alarmed by that, and I think that Muslims are setting themselves up for even a bigger failure if they think that this will lead to banning of the criticism of Islam. Not going to happen. I don't think that's definitely not going to happen. Sooner or later, you would see apostasy day as well, as the ex-Muslim movement gets bigger and bigger, because there are 12 Muslim countries where apostasy is punishable by death. Yeah.
So I really like your optimism, and I'd like to share it, but I'm not quite so sure. When you say that, since Islamophobia is being conflated with anti-Muslim bigotry, I think, yeah, as you said, it might set Muslims up for a bigger defeat. But have you heard of Sam Harris? Once he was giving a speech, he was giving an example from this woman who was saying, well, you cannot. So he was giving a hypothetical, what he was asking this woman, what would you say if there was this group of people who, because their holy book says every third child should walk in darkness or some such nonsense, as he puts it. And people, start carving out children's eyes, every third children, because their book says so. And then the woman says, then there is nothing you can say about it. It's their belief, their religion, whatever. There are unfortunately really people with such a stupid and disgusting mentality in governments with really high ranks, and I'm afraid we might actually suffer the consequences of such Pakistanis, as you put it.
So I don't understand your point. So you're saying that, but we're saying the different things. So Islamophobia Day, the UN has recognized basically anti-Muslim bigotry. So where does Sam Harris's? And I've heard that argument. There was this woman in the audience. I think she made that point, and then he said, "Is that coming from that woman's book? What was the name? Christine something." Anyway, so he's referring to that, and he gives that example of bald white men doing that as well. And would you? I get that point. But what does that has to do with anti-Muslim bigotry? As I said, the UN is not seeing that as not criticizing individual beliefs within an ideology. It's just that the UN can't sanction persecution or bigotry or discrimination of certain members of certain communities. That's what the UN is saying by Islamophobia Day.
Yeah, I think I understand it. My only fear is that they have now ceded that linguistic territory because of the pressure from the Muslim community. I think if the people in the UN were smart enough, they would have known not to conflate criticism of Islam, which is Islamophobia, or a fear of Islam, whatever, with anti-Muslim bigotry. But they have now done that. They have now usurped that word to conflate it with anti-Muslim bigotry. And I'm afraid that...
I get that point, and we've acknowledged that. But as I said, the UN is just acknowledging something. And again, yes, it is a poor choice of word. But Muslims are hopeful that it would turn into banning the criticism of Islam at one point. I'm saying that when legislators sit down, legislators are a lot smarter. When they sit down, that's not going to happen.
That won't happen.
So you don't think it's a slippery slope? Or you're not afraid it is?
Definitely not. I could bet my life on that. That would just not happen because at that very point, this industry, as they like to call, of criticism of Islam is so vibrant and so educated now that they can shoot down any argument that is brought forward by Muslims or pro banning the criticism of Islam group. Whenever they come up with any legislation or anything, that would be shot down straight away. It's like, oh, so I can't condemn homophobia? They would be like, hang on, yeah, you can condemn homophobia. Oh, okay, then that's what I'm doing. But by criticizing the Islamic literature, where it says to find the highest point in the city and throw a homosexual off that. That is a belief in Islam, and giving 100 lashes to an adulterer or a fornicator. Adulterer should be stoned to death. Can I not criticize that? Oh yeah, of course you can criticize that, because that is the core. These are the core values of a free world.
Of free speech.
Yes, exactly. And they'll be like, so that would be shot down. Don't worry about that. This is what I'm saying. Don't worry about that.
This is them just making dents in it with Islamophobia, hate speech. This is as far as they can go. Hate speech, inciting violence is as far as you can go. But to shut down, strictly legally speaking, it's very, very hard to push something as blanket as what they are trying for Islamophobia to mean.
I'll give you an example that even the Holocaust denial, which goes against the free speech rules or the principles of free speech, but even in the West, predominantly speaking, they have not banned it. Yeah, you can condemn someone, and just like we get condemned all the time that, oh, why are you nitpicking on Islam and bad elements of Islam, and some white people want to stay out of that. We get that. The condemnation will come with it, to say that if you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen. So that thing would always exist there. But strictly speaking, in terms of legislation, that's just not going to happen. Just like I think outside of France, Germany, and Austria, and a couple other European countries which really, really suffered at the hands of Nazism, Holocaust denial is not banned in America or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or in some other countries. New Zealand might, it's just not banned because it goes against the very spirit of the free world, and that's why criticism of Islam would never be banned in the free world. Never. Forget it. It's just not going to happen. Anyway.
That's why we've taken this risk, Zagros.
If you like these videos and want to support me in my activism, then you can support me on Patreon or PayPal. Stay free, everyone.